to have you today.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you. Thank you all for being here today. So as I was just kindly introduced, I have a bit of an interesting past. I've worked in a range of industries, and a lot of that has been around kind of learning and optimizing the basically life at work. And project management definitely plays a big part of that. And clearly with the work that you're doing with Taryn, I understand that you're all about to embark on or have just started a 4-week project yourselves. So we thought this might be a good time to talk about some of the nuts and bolts of project management, and just as importantly, some of what the mindset might need to be. Because I know we're all very busy. I know that this may not be kind of the main source of income. Some of this can be very new to us. Some of us aren't as familiar with some of these concepts. So without trying to go into a great deal of depth, what I've tried to do is I've tried to pull together what might be useful tools, right? So with those useful tools, what I'm hoping is that we'll be able to pick and choose from them, figure what works for us, and then take those back into the projects that we're involved in. So I understand that you're all involved in VR projects. Is that right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
everybody's involved in VR projects, and so effectively what you're working with is technology, and there are differences. Well, there are similarities that all projects have, and then there are specific areas which can be more useful if you're developing something technological, like your VR projects. So if you wouldn't mind very much, I'd love to hear from each of you, just really briefly for you to introduce yourselves and let me know effectively what your project is aimed at. So I'm just going to call out names as they appear on my screen. And if you'd be so kind, just to unmute yourself and just to really briefly, who you are, what your project is about, and if anything, what would you like to gain from today's session? So I'll start with Rita first, if you wouldn't mind.
So sorry, my background's quite loud. I'm with my daughter, so I think you might hear some Peppa Pig and a child trying to get involved. So
Fair enough.
Aurelia, give me 1 second. Yeah, so I studied architecture, and I've just done a master's in events management and marketing.
Perfect.
And the aim is to try and combine architecture, events, and tech.
Yep.
And so yeah, my project is basically because I'm trying to create spaces where I can show like my clients potential, like what their event could potentially become before the event actually happens. So yeah, I also started a hair care brand. So I decided to actually create a space where I launched my products. This is actually a friend of mine on the call's idea. Like, she gave it to me, and I thought, oh, that's actually perfect. It kind of combines everything that I'm currently doing. Brilliant. So it's basically a brand launch. So I'm creating a space where, people can attend, and also it will also be art. So I'm creating hair art because I'm quite a good artist as well. So it would kind of be a open gallery / launch of my hair care line, the brand. But yes, I'm gonna design the space. I'm either gonna design the space or find the actual venue that's in London somewhere and recreate it and then put my products in it and stuff like that. Yeah, that's it. That's me.
Perfect.
Thanks.
And anything in particular that you're hoping from today's session? Anything that would make it really useful for you specifically?
I think mainly time management. I've got a lot of things going on, and I think I struggle with balancing everything that's happening. Yeah, so I think mainly time management and finding a way to just balance everything and, given everything the equal amount of attention I believe it deserves. Yeah, that's it.
Good stuff. Thank you.
Thanks.
Next, I don't have your name up. It says, I think, Caramel Soldier. So I'm not sure what your actual name is, but if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and your project, please.
Hi, greetings. Yes, it is Caramel.
Okay.
It's actually my brand name,
Oh, perfect.
my performance name. So I'm a freelance dance entrepreneur. I'm a lover of life and like to get involved in many different things. Solving problems is my thing, through movement mainly and the arts. So I'm very targeted in the social aspects, the community aspects, and how we can do that. This is a whole new world to me. It interests me, but I have no idea coding and blah blah blah. It's all new, but I'm enjoying the journey. So the app that I'm working on, which is a great opportunity, I'm gonna read out my my elevator pitch so far. This is what I've got. So the problem in today's reality, with so many restrictions and the rapid changes to adapt to keep up with life, our natural energy has become stagnant, disrupting our frequency and causing so many diseases in our world, internally and externally, that a new form of generational trauma is being developed. So the solution is a social prescription of my heart dance, which is a social dance basically, but Heart Dance XR will be an immersive movement therapy app for you to reconnect with self, family, friends, and your community through a cultural vibe, developing good mental health and creating those endorphins to stimulate the body in any environment through your love of music, whether at home, online, or amongst your community. Heart Dance XR provides freedom, healing, identity, and connection. So that's what it will be in the future. And that's what I'm working towards. Obviously, it will be scaled right down. And I'm just working on one aspect of the dance, of how that can be put into VR to create either freedom, healing, identity, or connection. And what I'm looking to get out of this session today is your expertise on agile management, more in Scrum. I've been doing a bit of research on Scrum mastery. So I think for what I do as a like a stage manager, events management on that side, it would be great to know how to manage other creatives and their projects and how that can then be brought into the VR world.
Okay, perfect.
And that's me.
Thank you so much. Kamara, please.
Hi, I'm Kamara. I work as a software engineer, but I'm otherwise keen to explore the space between technology and storytelling and really start creating immersive experiences that bring people together. But over the next 4 weeks for this course, I hope to start working on these ideas by building a few mini experiences and games based on a circus theme or fairground theme, and eventually expanding this out to include multiple players and shared experiences. And for this session, just to learn about project management and how to break tasks down into manageable chunks would be really helpful.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Larice, is that Larice? I'm not sure how that's pronounced. Forgive me if I'm getting that wrong.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a game designer, and yeah, obviously I'm going to be creating a game. I want to have my own business as an indie game developer. I don't know what else to say, really. Yeah, I'm creating a game.
how could we make today useful for you?
I don't know. I'm not too sure. I'm here to learn.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll hopefully make it useful. Cleona, please.
Hi. So I'm currently a second year neuroscience PhD student. And I'm combining brain imaging techniques with virtual reality. So I've had like a little bit of experience kind of just creating scenarios that we can experiment in. But for my project, what I want to do is be able to import DICOM images, so MRIs, into the VR space. Number one, to look at any structural differences, so things like TBI, like traumatic brain injuries, but then also further along the line to be able to use that as a tool for pre-surgery. So like be able to try out the surgery beforehand and kind of get used to the techniques and potentially use that as training tools for medical doctors. So
those MRIs, if I'm understanding properly, you'll be able to walk around them and move around and see them from every dimension, just as those front and side and top elevations that. So that's what I'd like to do, and just be able to slice them within, because at that point it will be a 3D object. It should be a lot easier to slice the MRIs in different areas. And for things like traumatic brain injuries, where we can kind of see those differences in the structure, I think that would be really useful to just kind of be able to look at it in a 3D space and be able to zoom in a lot closer and kind of get that in-depth view of it. I think it'd be an excellent teaching tool as well. So I'd love to see that when you're done working on it. How could we make today useful for you from a project management perspective?
So I think what I'm hoping to get out of this session is mainly being able to effectively break down the project, because I can break down kind of my research and I'm fine with doing that, but that's a whole different sector and like way of breaking down something. I'm used to breaking down a research project, but I'm not used to breaking down a development project, a VR project that's like an app. It would be good to kind of know where to start as a foundation and how to build up and what we kind of want to aim for after the 4 weeks type of thing.
Fair enough. I'm sure we can help with that. And Brenda is the last name that I have on my screen. So Brenda, if you'd be so kind.
Hi, I'm Brenda. I'm an avid traveler, so my project is based on basically being able to experience what a hotel suite would be like through a VR headset, so you can experience what it's like before you were to go ahead and book the hotel. But I do think it could expand in different ways because it is property based. You can also do like residential property and commercial properties. So you could see what your potential house would look like before you were to purchase it, or if you wanted to change something within your housing design or commercial property design, then you could change that. But mainly I'm focusing on a hotel suite, so the customer could experience what it's like before they go ahead and experience the suite itself. What I'm aiming to get from this event would probably be, I struggle with breaking down the tasks so that I know what I'm doing from A to Z. And because it's not something I've done before, tech is a completely new field for me. So I would most like to understand how I would go about doing it and doing it in a way that's effective for me, and so that I can do everything that I need to do in the time limit that we have.
Perfect. All right, thank you all so much for sharing and letting me know about these, I've got to say, really interesting and exciting sounding projects that you all have going on. You're clearly all using different aspects of VR and trying to push those boundaries. I'm really, really excited to see what happens. So I'm going to stay in touch with Molka, and hopefully when your projects are completed and you do your virtual presentations, I'm going to see if I can pop in and have a look. So team, what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to start sharing a very simple slide deck with you, right? So hopefully, whoops, if this is working. Hopefully you can see my screen. Is that correct? Is that a yes?
Yeah.
Is that a no?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And are you seeing it in slideshow mode?
Now we are seeing
Now
it.
you are. Perfect. Okay, good stuff. So team, the way I like to deliver training and learning is not to have very kind of text heavy slides. So I like to just have the basics as some key points, and the rest I like to do in conversation. So what I'm going to invite you to do is, if you have questions, comments, anything to add, even things you don't agree with, I want you to just go ahead, unmute yourselves and chime in. Does that sound fair? Yeah, because I'd much rather that we answer your questions and address your points as we go along, rather than you holding on to something which then maybe you forget to ask at a later point, right? So I'm going to keep asking you as we go along. If there's any questions anyone has, please don't be shy. All right. So let's start with this. We're talking about project management and we're all working on projects. How would you describe a project? For starters, it's a good place to start, I think. What is a project? It's funny, when you ask a question like that, all of a sudden we kind of stop, because we intuitively know what a project is. But if you're actually asked to explain it, all of a sudden you start thinking, well, what is it really? Yeah. So we can think of a project this way. It's any sequence of tasks that must be completed to produce an outcome. So that's a working definition of a project for you. A sequence of tasks that must be completed to produce an outcome, which means anything that we do that takes more than one step is a project. I believe someone has a hand up. Please go ahead and unmute yourselves.
Yep, sorry, Daljit. It's just you have a box, a square up, a menu, which is blacked out on our, well, I can't see the screen properly.
It's probably the Zoom interface on top.
Okay.
Yeah, you've just moved it to the other side now.
Right. So I think this thing that's moving around now, is this the thing that's blocking your view?
Yes.
Yeah, that kind of, I think it might be the camera view that you can.
That's the camera view. Okay, so
move that.
okay. That's going to make things a little bit tough for me, but I'll see if we can minimize that. So that's the best I can do. Unfortunately, I can't see yourselves now, so I'm going to rely on you talking. So that's odd, because that doesn't normally happen. I wonder if I can change the shape of this so that maybe I can put this, if I put it this way and put it along the bottom, maybe it won't get in the way. Or maybe it will. So this is odd. I've not had this before.
Can you move it to the other screen by any chance?
No, I've just got the one screen hooked up right
screen.
now. So I'm going to try and put it's now at the bottom. Hopefully it won't get in the way too much there. Is this better? Can everyone see now?
That's actually better, yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So considering that a project is a sequence of tasks that has to be completed to produce an outcome, think about the projects that you already manage. Because we're doing this every day, aren't we? We're all putting together sequences of tasks that has to be completed. So a project has to have a beginning and an end point, right? So what is an example of a project that you're involved in day to day? Anybody? Did anyone think of one?
Getting ready in the morning.
Absolutely. That is actually the perfect example, right? It's a sequence of tasks. You have to do those tasks and you have to do them in the right order in order to produce the outcome. Does that make sense? Yeah. Cooking is a project because there's a sequence of tasks and you have to do those tasks in the correct order. If you get those things wrong, if you put them in the wrong order or do one thing when you should be doing another, then you could, I don't know, for example, get dressed and then go into the shower, right? It's not going to work out well. Or if you're cooking and you get things in the wrong order. So what I encourage you to think about is that you are already managing projects. And this discipline that we call project management, what it's actually doing is it's taking things that we know and that we do and building some formal structure around that so we can apply that over and over again to different situations. Does that make sense? Right?
Yeah.
So what that means is when we're managing, we are already managing projects. We're doing it intuitively all the time without thinking about it. Any task that has a beginning and an end and has more than one step, broadly speaking, you can call that a project, right? The difference is when you're dealing with that kind of a project, something like getting ready in the morning, it's just you and you're not having to manage other people, right? You're just having to remember the sequence and execute the sequence in the order that it needs to go. Often when you're project managing, you're dealing with other people as well. It's not just yourself. There are other stakeholders. And sometimes you might be reliant on what other people are doing, right? You might rely that, I need Brenda, for example, to get this piece of work done, because without that, the next piece can't happen. Okay, so then you're not just looking after the project, you're looking after people as well. So project managers often end up being people managers as well, because the bigger a project, the more people tend to be involved. I know some of you, I could hear children in the background. So for example, if you're getting ready to get everyone in the car to go from point A to point B, a school run or whatever, you're having to manage those other people involved, right? You're having to make sure everyone is ready, everyone is in place, everyone is doing things in the right order, so we can all get in the car and everyone has everything they need and then they get to go. But these are things we're doing intuitively. We don't write down a plan for that, we just do it. Okay? When we're dealing with bigger and more complex projects with more steps and more tasks, planning starts to become important, right? And then what we're actually doing is we're managing what's happening instead of doing the work ourselves. So if you're project managing a team, and that maybe involves, it could be anything from 3 people upwards. If you're the project manager, you might not be doing the work in the project itself. As a project manager, your role is to make sure that the project runs smoothly. Now, I know that we're doing smaller projects and we're carrying a lot of the weight of the work that needs to be done ourselves on our own shoulders. Am I correct? Right? So that being said, we can still benefit from the disciplines that make up project management, the tools, the thinking, the thought process behind it, because what it means is we don't have to carry around in our head the hundreds of things that have to get done, every single little step and where it goes. If we can take away from ourselves the burden of carrying that in our head, getting it into some documentation, getting it onto some charts so that we can visually take a quick look and know exactly where we are, then that's going to take a lot of pressure off of us. And it increases the odds of success for exactly that reason. Who's our friend here who does the, who's doing the PhD in neuroscience?
That's me.
That's Cleona, right?
Cleona.
Yeah.
So, Cleona will be able to tell you about things like working memory, for example, of how we have different kinds of memory. We have long-term memory and we have short-term memory. And then we have some memory that just holds information in hand just for the moment, right? And the kind of load that it will put on your cognition, on your, let's call it brain power, for lack of a better term, to be trying to hold all this information in your head and get it done on top of all the other complexities of life, it's probably too much to ask for anybody. The bigger the project gets, the more that will be the case, right? Okay. So think about this. We're already doing projects, which means we intuitively understand what it takes to be a project manager. But if we're going to be actual project managers for ourselves or for others, then it's worth thinking about putting some structure around that. So we're not working just on intuition and we're not just responding to what happens in front of us as it happens. Make sense? Yeah? Any thoughts or questions at any point right now? Or are we happy to move on? Okay, happy to move on. Perfect. So what does a project manager do? Well, think about what you do, and we're going to look and see how that maps onto what we have here. So one of the things that a project manager must do is understand needs and limitations. Okay. We set out to complete a project because someone sets us a project, or we set one for ourselves. What are the needs we're trying to fulfill? What are the limitations? What's getting in our way? So have a quick think, team. Does everyone have something to write with and write on? Does everyone have like a notepad or something? Or if not, if we can open up a little note window. I'd encourage you to start thinking about what the needs are that your project is serving and what the limitations are to this particular project right now. Okay, so some of the limitations might be that there's not enough people power. Maybe you're having to do this by yourself for the large part. A limitation might be, for example, budget. If you had a bigger budget, maybe you could hire a bigger team, right? Or you could hire teams in different time zones so that work can carry on around the clock. How about that as a limitation? Another limitation is how long you have. I understand that you've got about 4 weeks for your project, right? Yeah. And at the same time, we're thinking about limitations, we're also thinking about the needs. Whose needs are we trying to fulfill? What are your needs as the project owner who's trying to complete this piece of work? What are the needs of the other people involved, the other stakeholders? What are the needs of the people that you're hoping are going to use the product or service that's going to be developed through your project? Right? Because a project is, you can think of a project as something that's defined by its limits. That's what makes it happen. And sometimes what we have to do is we have to negotiate the way we're going to go about things or how much we can get done with regard to those limits. In Agile project management, there's an acronym, tripping over my words, there's an acronym that is Moscow. Yeah, and it stands for the following. So please scribble these down. M is for must have. What must your project have? What must it do? C is for could have. So potentially, if there's enough time and enough resource, maybe we could push this a little bit further. Must have, could have, should have, right? Must have, could have, should have, and finally, won't have this time. If we can define our project through those things, then we're defining the needs and the limitations all in one go. Does that make sense? Yeah? Must have, could have, should have, and won't have this time. If we can define that right at the beginning, it can take a lot of pressure off, because a lot of us have said, you know, we're new to some of this technology. We're doing some of our first projects in this case. We've got some very ambitious projects here as well. So that's putting a lot of pressure on ourselves, given that we've got 4 weeks to get it completed. If we can answer these questions, we can start figuring out what the needs are and what the limitations are. And if we can do that, that can reduce a lot of the stress that's attached when we start thinking, how will I get this done? How will I get it done, given that there's not a huge budget and a big team to work with? Does that make sense? Right? Is that a useful tool? And again, it's just to do with mindset. You figure that out. You answer those questions. And let's say, for example, someone hired you as a project manager. I know you're working on yours now. But if somebody had hired you, if Milka had said, look, you know, I'm hiring you, I want you to manage this project for me, this is what I want done, you could use that little model, the Moscow model, to have the initial conversation and make sure that everyone's expectations are managed, yours and theirs, right? So if there's a won't have this time, and Milka was saying, no, 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 that's a must have, then as project manager, we might say, well, in that case, we're going to either need more time or more budget or more people, whatever it happens to be. And then you can start negotiating that. Because ultimately, if you're project manager, you'll be held accountable at the end as to whether or not something worked and why. Making sense?
Yeah, Daljeet, I got a quick question actually. It's quite
Sure.
interesting what you said, that you can use that for negotiation.
Yep.
Because could that be used then to kind of negotiate, like let's say if it's a client or a customer,
Yep.
would you be able to use that to sort of say that, well, actually you haven't got enough time in this project to do this?
Exactly that.
And if you want this extra feature, then it's going to cost this much extra, and then that lets you sort of drive your price up and be able to.
Yeah, potentially. It gives them the choice, that you're letting them know that these are the resources available. This is what you can expect, right? Because as project manager as project manager, effectively, it falls to you to deliver what you said you was going to deliver. So to have that conversation right at the start, whether you're having it with yourself, right? So let's say, for example, somebody has, I believe one of the team mentioned that they wanted to do like a dance app, and they really want licensed music in there. It's like, well, you can have licensed music, but then your costs go up. So what's it going to be, right? Do you want to deal with licensing costs, and do you want to deal with the complexities of that? Or are you going to deal with the complexities of generating new music that doesn't, or negotiating and finding a way to find something which is maybe royalty free, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely perfect. So think of the must have, could have, should have, won't have this time. And remember, team, these are some of your early projects. Something that you won't have this time, we shouldn't be discouraged by it, because that means next time, maybe, right? As we grow and as experience grows and we deal with bigger budgets, we can get into new places and new angles. So work with what can be done for now, because some of the principles of agile project management specifically is that a project must come in on time and it must come in on budget, right? So with agile project management, those are some of the core principles. Must come in on time, must come in on budget. So what do you negotiate? The features. What are the features of the project? That's the bit that has to be negotiable, because time and budget are fixed. So you guys have a 4-week deadline, right? That's fixed. There's nothing you can do about that. There's no negotiation there. You have to have completed in 4 weeks. And then your budget is whatever it happens to be. Perhaps now you can't raise a bigger budget than the one that you actually have. So what do you negotiate? Features. And how do we do that? We use Moscow. Must have, could have, should have, won't have this time. Does that make sense, team?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the idea is that we minimize the pressure that we put ourselves and the project team under by doing what can be done, as opposed to promising ourselves or others more than what we can deliver at the moment and then being under tremendous stress. Okay? Good stuff. Moving on. Project managers, they plan. Really, the more work that you put into the planning at the beginning, the less stress you're going to experience as a project manager going forward. So I know that you all were given a project planning document. So everyone has a project planning document. I'm not going to say who's done it. I'm just going to say this. I'm going to recommend that, given that we're 4 weeks out, if you haven't spent a lot of time with that document, make that your job for today. Because the more work you put into that document, the more questions you're going to have answered, the more sense your project will make. Because within that document, you'll think about what are the needs, what are the outcomes, who are the stakeholders, what are all the limitations, what is it we're trying to achieve, how are we going to go about it? And again, it takes you outside of carrying this around in your head and bringing it into the world and having it in front of you so that you can actually see it. Project managers, if you was doing a project management role, and I know right now we're doing a mixed role because we're working in the project and we're working on the project. But if you were doing a project management role, your job would be just to manage the project, which means make sure that things are happening on time, in sequence, in budget, and everyone has what they need and things are moving forward. And in order to have that, You have to be the one with the plan. Okay. If one of us were working as a project manager, what that should mean is any day of any week, any time, somebody should be able to ask us, okay, can you tell me where the project is at right now? And we should be able to tell them in detail right away at any point. Yeah, because we have what they call a finger on the pulse. There's not a day that we don't know what's happening with the project, of what needs to be happening, where we are, and where it needs to go. And then we monitor it.
Quick question, Daljit.
Sure.
Is that like when you say, you have to know, like, is that like in a percentage, or is it like we're like 3 out of 5, or like if we've got 10 tasks, 5 out, or how do you measure that?
Well, by whatever metrics suit you. Okay, so it might be in stages. It might be, look, we're in the stage where we're developing this part of the software, or we're now developing the graphics, or we're working on the music. So what I actually mean is knowing what has been done, knowing what is being done, and where we are in the sequence of events. Yeah. Not, well, we're about halfway.
Yeah.
That doesn't really mean anything. We don't know what that means. And if you had hired me, Taryn, to be a project manager for you, and you said, how's the project going? And I said, yeah, I reckon we're about halfway. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't be happy to hear that, right? You'd want a lot more detail. As project manager, this is why you're monitoring all the time, because ultimately you're accountable, just like you're accountable for your projects right now. Okay? And we deliver. The other thing the project manager is ultimately responsible for is that the project gets done on time, in budget, and delivers what it said it was going to do, which is why, going back to needs and limitations, we negotiate all of that right at the beginning. If somebody is asking you to do something that can't be delivered within the time, within the budget, within the limitations, then we say, we need to think about this, because that's not going to work. Right?
And the thing is, like, but the thing is, if we're in a situation at the moment, like where there's a lot of inexperience in terms of how long things take, or what can be done in that time. So if the project person who's managing the project doesn't maybe understand how long things might take, what's the way around that?
So the way around that is, this is where you need to tap into your network. Okay. Project managers can reach out in the planning phase to subject matter experts. In fact, what they often have is they have subject matter experts within the team. Okay. So if you don't know, for example, how long will it take to code something at the degree of complexity that you need, you then may need to ask a subject matter expert and say, realistically speaking, how long does something like this take?
Yeah.
And when it comes to guessing time, there's a rule of thumb which says multiply the time that you think something will take by 2.4. Now, the reason for that is because things go wrong. People go off sick, right? Suppliers might shut down because of a bank holiday. Somebody might have an internet outage. There can be all kinds of reasons. So if you plan the project and multiply things by 2.4 in terms of timing, in terms of how long things are getting done, what that's going to mean is the things that run on time, that's great. That means you've got extra flexibility. And then the things that run over, they might absorb some of that extra time that you've regained by things running to plan. Does that make sense? Yeah?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Perfect. So always, because look, we live in a world where all kinds of uncertain things are going to happen. It's better to give yourself more time than you think it will actually take. If you figure it out down to the final second, and one thing goes wrong somewhere on the journey, because that's the day when the internet went out, well, now the whole thing is out of time. Right? So overestimate the time that things could take so that you can deliver.
Quick question with that, sorry. So if you have like multiple, obviously you will have multiple phases or bits that you need to do. So you multiply those bits individually by 2.4, and then do you then multiply the whole project, or that's what you've done the calculations of timing?
You do the calculations of timing before you start the project. You don't say, well, the project should take this, now it's going to take this, because remember, the rules with Agile is it's got to be delivered on time.
Yeah, no, sorry, I meant in the sense of, like, let's say you had four phases,
yeah,
and you've multiplied each of them by 2.4.
yeah.
What I'm asking is that in your recommendation, is that it, or then do you add up all those times and then multiply it again by 2.4?
No, I think that would compound it.
Cool.
Right? So
yeah,
you want to give each section of what you think it might take, and then giving yourself a bit extra. It's not unlike leaving early to get to a place, right? Because you know that if you leave just on time, that will be the day when you didn't realize there was roadworks, right? We've all been there, I'm sure. You know that this journey should take you 15 minutes, should be no problem, and that's the day where something goes wrong, which is why when you're traveling somewhere, it's wise to leave extra time. Okay, so it's very much the same sort of thing.
Okay.
In planning.
Thank you.
Okay, so in approaching the project, if we look at this grid that we have in front of us, I'm not going to dwell on this for a long time, but what you're looking for is you want the axis where you have a clear approach and a clear vision, the painting by numbers one, right? If you have an unclear approach and an unclear vision, then you have walking in a fog. You're wandering around. The likelihood that things are going to work out the way you do, is very, very low. Okay, if we have a clear vision and a clear approach, then it's like painting by numbers. Painting by numbers in the sense that it's hard to mess up painting by numbers. You just know that if it's a number 4, it's the red color, and you color in that bit in red. And if it's a number 3, it's blue, and you color in the blue. And as long as you follow the steps, because you've got a clear vision and a clear approach, then it's fine. It's going to work out. Yeah. And those other analogies, something like going on a quest, you have a clear vision, you know what it is that you want to do, but you have an unclear approach. You don't know quite how to go about it. So that's why it's like going on a quest. It's like an adventure, like in the movies, but just like those adventures, we don't know what's going to happen. Right? So the project management mindset is very much, let's get the vision clear, which is your project management document. What are the needs? Who are the stakeholders? What's the budget? All of those things. And then let's get a clear approach, which is the planning phase of what's going to get done, when's it going to get done, who's doing it, and how am I going to keep a finger on the pulse? All making sense?
Yep.
Right? And remember, team, this is not just for you to understand. This is also because there are going to be other people who are maybe doing one task, but they're relying on you to keep everything going. So if you'd come to me and you'd said, Daljit, can you do this task for me? Because you're the project manager and I'm part of the project team. And I say, okay, fine. I need to know exactly what it is you're asking of me. I need to be very clear. And it helps if I know how what I'm doing fits into the bigger picture. It doesn't mean I need to know everything, but just this grid applies to what I'm doing as well. If I have a clear vision and a clear approach, it's much more likely I'll deliver for you what it is that you want. If there's lack of clarity in either of those places, I might get some work done, but the likelihood is it might not be exactly what you want. There might be something wrong with it. Like, if you ask me to say, will you model up this car for me, right? I want you to create a 3D model of this car. Well, what if I make a 3D model and it's like too high a poly count, right? And I've spent a lot of time working on it and I've created this really high resolution model, which now isn't suitable for what you want it to do. So now that adds work because it's now got to be simplified or it's got to be done again, or, whereas if I'd had that clarity of vision and a clear approach to start with, it's much more likely that first time round, I would model up the car that you need for your project. All making sense? Yeah, the project manager needs to be absolutely clear what's going on, because if you're not clear what's going on, then the project team can't be clear what's going on. And if they're not clear what's going on, then the work doesn't get done. Which again, I'm going to keep reiterating it. Please spend a lot of time with that project document. Spend all the time that you can with it. And that will answer questions like the following. What's the purpose of the project? Not just what do you want me to produce? Right? Not just I want this piece of software. What's the purpose of the project? Are we trying to improve people's mental health by creating a therapeutic dance app? Are we trying to create a game to entertain people and, you know, do something fun? Are we trying to create an educational tool so that we can look at a scan of the brain in 3D instead of looking at it in 2D? What's the actual purpose? And what problem does it solve? What's going to get better as a result of you producing this work? How's it going to change people's experience? How's it going to change their world, so to speak? Will they feel better? Will they be better educated? Will they feel more confident? Will they have a better understanding of the thing that you're trying to get them to learn about? Right? And who are the stakeholders? Who are the stakeholders? Well, you're a stakeholder because you're involved in the project. Who else? Are the XR Bootcamp stakeholders? What are their concerns? What about your end users? What are their concerns? When you present your project at the end, who's going to be looking at it? What are their concerns? The more we have awareness of who our stakeholders are, the better we can communicate what it is that we're doing. Right? So I believe Caramel earlier on, she gave us this kind of pitch. Do you remember? She stepped in and said, this is what I'm trying to do. And she had a pitch prepared and she went ahead and presented that to the group, which was wonderful. But that pitch is going to have to be slightly tuned for every different stakeholder group. If she's going for funding, the stakeholders are going to want to know, how is this going to generate income? Right? If she goes to an organization that supports people with their mental health, then they might be concerned with cost of how much is it going to cost for us to get VR headsets. If she's explaining it to an end user, they've got different needs. So know your stakeholders, team. And I'm sure there's, because I did have a look briefly at your project document, I'm sure there's a space in there for that. And if there isn't, no worries, add it. The more we know the stakeholder, the more likely it is that we're going to deliver something successfully. And of course, every stakeholder has their own concerns. I'm sorry, was someone just about to say something? If you were, please go ahead. I'm listening. No? Okay. So think about everyone's different concerns and of course the limitations. Remember Moscow from earlier on? Must have, could have, should have, won't have this time. You can talk about that with people when you're thinking about their concerns. Some people will say, well, if it doesn't have this, it's no good to me. It's like, okay, great. Well, either we have that conversation or we decide whether this is the right project for this time. Okay. So you have your document, which I know you've got. It's a live document, and obviously the more the plan, the better you manage. Because if you know what the plan looks like from beginning to end, and things are not on track for whatever reason, you know that something is going wrong and you need to step into this. When I say keep it a live document, I mean, don't just do all of this work, spend hours potentially filling this out with as much detail as you can, and then just hit save and leave it. I'm saying that as project manager, you should be spending time with that document every day and having a look at it and saying, is the project evolving as I expected? Does this need to be tweaked? Has something new emerged that I hadn't considered yet that I should now include in what's going on? A project manager ideally will spend time with that document every single day, and they make that their anchor. It's the thing that they can keep going back to. And here's one of the reasons why, team. When you create your project document, you get sign off from your stakeholders, right? So whoever it is that signed off and funded the project is going to sign off on that, which means they agree with the contents, which means if anyone asks you for something that's outside of the scope of the project, you can then turn around and say, look, this is the document, you've signed off on it, this is what we're going by, right? And what that can do is it can protect you as well as protecting your team, as well as protecting the interests of all the other stakeholders. Because inevitably in the world of work and in the world in general, you know, people change their minds. It happens all the time. What a document like this will do is keep everyone accountable to the same standards. Does that make sense? Right? How many of us have been in a situation where someone's asked us to do a piece of work and we go and do that work and then they want to add something to it? And the adding something to it might change everything. It happens all the time. Right? So be aware of this, keep it as your anchor, use that document to protect and support yourself. Okay. It's really important that we manage what the risks are, because if we can figure out what the risks are to our project, we can figure out what we're going to do about those if it happens. Okay, so we can have a plan to mitigate risk as they occur, if they occur, pardon me. But if we've already thought about those risks, nothing's taking us by surprise, right? So, for example, what are you going to do if the internet goes out? What are you going to do if the headset doesn't start up on the day you're trying to do your presentation? What would you do if this? What would you do if that? You figure out all the risks. And this is where it can help to have a cynical person on board. Because what a cynical person will do is they'll point out every possible risk to you, everything that could go wrong. And then you can sit there and figure out what the plan is of what you're going to do if that happens. And you divide the risks by this grid. How likely is it that that risk could occur? And if it does occur, what will be the impact on the project? So if there's something that's very likely to happen and there's a very significant or severe impact on the project if it does happen, then we really need to have a plan in place for that. If it's unlikely and if it does happen, it doesn't really risk the project, well, we don't have to be as concerned. We should be concerned, we should be prepared, but we don't have to be to the same degree. Make sense? Right? So Taryn will remember this. He once came to London where I am, and he had a presentation to do. And Taryn, do you remember when you showed up and you realized that you didn't have a laptop charger with you?
Yep.
Right? So that's a high risk, but how it could have a significant or severe impact, because what if his battery goes flat when he's trying to do a presentation? But how likely is it? It's not highly likely because it doesn't happen very often, but it is something we should think about because it can happen. So maybe it's a medium risk, and maybe we mitigate that risk by, I don't know, having a checklist before we leave. Make sense? Right? The bigger an impact something could have on your project, the more we need to think about what that is. And a grid like this is really useful in figuring that out. Okay, team, let's get into some practicalities of actually planning, because I know that our projects are already underway. Maybe we don't have to worry too much about stakeholders because, you know, we're working independently or small project teams. And I think Cleona was saying earlier on that you're used to, pardon me, that sounds like a fire alarm. Okay, I'm just gonna have to mute myself for a second and make sure everything's okay.
Well, hopefully it's not anything too serious, but
Serious, yes.
but yeah, I think yeah, I'll just fill in a little bit here while he's sorting that out. Yeah, it's really kind of, I'm finding this quite useful actually, a lot of this information. I I think one of the risks we have already looked at is, well, what if there's another lockdown, we can't get back into class again? So that kind of risk that we've already thought out, and we thought we could easily move to an online system. Everyone's used to using Slack. You know, everyone's used to coming on Zoom like we are today. So if any situation does arise like that, we can always just quickly switch to an online system. One thing that I think that we're going to start doing moving forward in the next 4 weeks, we're going to slightly change the class structure. We are still going to be having that sort of lessons where we're going to be covering specific skills that you're going to need for your projects. But also we're probably going to move to a one-to-one sort of having one-to-one catch-ups, what kind of Daljeet referred to as sort of stand-ups in the Agile management process. And that's basically where every so often we'll have a little catch-up and things like if let's say you guys are working on your project and I don't talk to you for 2 weeks, and you know, and then you say in 2 weeks time, oh well, I need this building built, or I need this you know, I need this asset, but then we haven't got enough time because we've got too much workload, you know, we haven't got the capacity to build it, you know, then things will slide very quickly. Because what tends to happen is, and this what happens with a lot of small projects, is that we will come together and have this amazing idea and say, yeah, let's do this great thing, yeah. And then a week will go by, and then I'll think you're doing something, you might think I'm doing something, but I'm thinking you're doing it, but you think I'm doing it. And, you know, then we meet in 2 weeks time and nothing's been done. We've misunderstood each other. And that's why the project document is so useful, because it gives us a roadmap for where we're going. And it seems like such a, like, and I have to admit, like, I found it really hard to kind of get this project management thing. It didn't come to me very easily because I'm more of a kind of like a doer and like artist. So we tend to do things like based on feeling and kind of when we're feeling right for it and things. But the thing is, when we're working on all these projects and we're working on production projects and training projects and planning things in the future, things are getting so busy that I can't keep everything in my head and I'll start to forget things. And I'm like this as well. I don't know if anyone else is like this, but as soon as there's sort of like a situation, like let's say I'm working on something, I mean, I could go into the back garden and I'll be lost for like the next 4 or 5 hours and I'll forget anything that I did, anything that I've got to do, and I'll be like off on some other journey. And then that's like a bit of a problem, you see, because tasks can start to slide, projects will start to slide. And I was at a position at one point where kind of all my projects were all over the place. And so this kind of project management, I've had a lot of coaching from Daljeet, so he's helped me a lot with this sort of stuff, which is why he's here today. Are you back, Daljeet?
Yep, yeah. I'm sorry about that.
No,
we did actually have a fire alarm go off in the building, but it turns out, I don't know, I think somebody maybe burned the toast or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's funny, I was just talking about risk and all of a sudden the fire alarm goes off, right? So someone's trying to tell me something. Okay, team, from what I can remember, we were just starting to talk about having tasks in front of us so we can figure out what needs doing. So task boarding is a really handy way of doing this. Basically what you do is when you're planning your project, you think about all the individual steps that need doing. Okay, you write them all down, put them on post-its, put them on a wall or in a flip chart, and then what you do is you move them around until they're in the right order, right? And what that will do is, especially because there's so many people who are probably creative, visual, kinesthetic type people, it's a great way of just getting the whole project mapped out and having it right in front of you. And once you have all those tasks, if you feel like it, you can add other things like how long do you think it's going to take? Whose job is it to do? I know Taryn was just talking about, you know, dividing up responsibilities, and you could then divide these up and color code them or what have you. But task boarding is a really good way of just getting a feel of what's going on and figuring out exactly how many steps are involved. And you can do this as an exercise. You could just task board kind of getting ready in the morning, just as a drill to see how easy it is to do. The other thing it will make you aware of is there'll be areas where there's not enough detail. Okay. And that's useful as well, because you then know that maybe I need to go and speak to a subject matter expert about this. Maybe I need to figure out what steps are involved so that I can task board more fully. And the beauty of it is you can put it up on the wall, you can walk away from it, and you can come back. And what that means is other things will start to jump out at you. You won't necessarily get everything down on the first attempt, because that's not how we tend to remember things. We tend to remember the most obvious things first. And just like in creative pursuits, the creative ideas come up after all the obvious ones are out of the way. Right? So I'd encourage you to try task boarding. What you can then do with your task board is you can create a Gantt chart. I'm sure we've seen these before. We may not have used them, but likelihood is we've all seen these before. So you can make one of these in, I don't know, you can make it in Excel. If you've got access to something like Microsoft Project, that can make these things for you. But if you look, this is for something that seems pretty mundane. It's just doing a mail shot. And no one does it like this anymore anyway, because this is thinking about physically mailing things. But every one of those jobs, steps on your task board get translated into a series of steps from 1 to 15 down here. Okay. Across this axis, you have time. So if you was making one of these, this would be 4 weeks long. And then these blocks represent how long each task is expected to take. Do you see? Right? Now, what that helps you to do is there are some things that can be happening in parallel. There are other things that have dependencies. So you can create these arrows so that you know that you can't do this until this is done. And if you know that's the case, then there's planning that you can do around that. If something is going wrong here, well, we can still be doing some of these things. Okay, so not all projects are handled sequentially. You can have things happening in parallel as well. So if you're a visual thinker, which I'm sure most of us are, we can use something like a Gantt chart to just have a representation. So when we had somebody from the team earlier on saying that, you know, they're not sure how to visualize things, or they're not sure how to really kind of plan out a project in particular that has all these different steps, these 2 slides I'm hoping will be very useful for you. Number 1, get everything down that needs to be down. And then number 2, turn it into something that looks like a Gantt chart. Right? You combine those 2 things and you can have a visual plan of everything. Every day when you look at your Gantt chart, let's say we're here, we know where this work should be in the process. Right? I'm here. These things should have been done already. This thing should be mostly done. These things should have been done already. These things are in process because I'm here on the 25th. Right? And as project manager, that means if someone needs help or support, or if someone's having a problem, you're looking at this every single day. And that means that the project problems are getting dealt with as they arrive. Make sense? Yeah. Agile project management really believes in checking every day on what's going on, because the idea is if you're checking in every day, then the project can only fall behind in the order of days. If you're checking every week, then it's going to fall behind in the order of weeks, because maybe someone had a problem on Monday after our meeting, and now we don't have another meeting until next Monday. Yeah. So look up Gantt charts, and you can make them in Excel. They're you know, if you go into YouTube and put in how to make a Gantt chart, you'll have all kinds of instructions of how you can make one of these, and it can be a very useful tool. This is really useful. Okay. This is called a Kanban, and you can do this physically with Post-its on a board or on a wall, or you can do it virtually using an app like Trello. And what it does is you put down all your tasks. So you've done your task boarding, which does all of this for you, because you've got all these individual tasks put down. At the beginning, they're all here. They're all in to do. As you're working on them, you move into doing, And when you're done, obviously they move into this. So what's going to happen is all the post-its from here are going to slowly migrate across the board. And it's another way of very quickly keeping an eye and seeing what's going on. It's also useful if you're working with bigger teams, because you can color code different people's tasks on different post-its, right? That way you can also tell who's working how hard, right? Because, I don't know, let's say mine are the yellow post-its, and at the end of the week, only one of them has moved anywhere. Well, you need to have a chat with me, don't you? Okay, except you won't have a chat with me at the end of the week. You're going to have a chat with me every single day, because Agile project managers check on the project every day. It doesn't have to be a long meeting, but we're going to come on to the 3 questions that we ask when we're having what we call a Scrum meeting. Yeah. So team, I'd love to hear from you for a moment. These 3 slides, task boarding, Gantt charts, and Kanban, do these look like tools that you'd be able to use? Or do you think they'd be useful in the projects that you're working on?
I've used like Kanban, that method before. So I feel like out of the 3, this would probably be something I would use.
Right. So that's good that you've already used them. I would encourage you, if you can, to try something like this. The reason why is, the other thing about this is you can figure out what the critical path is. And what a critical path is if there are certain dependencies that are absolutely essential, that means that's where you do your maximum risk management. Yeah, which a Kanban by itself can't necessarily tell you. So I'd encourage you to combine what you do with the Kanban with the Gantt chart for that reason. Keep an eye on dependencies, flag the things where you've really got to manage risks, and keep an eye on what's going on in parallel.
Yeah, I was gonna say I do my like usually the Gantt chart. I actually just draw it out. So I'll just do like 4 sections for 4 weeks, and then I will actually just draw out little boxes. It's very crude, looks really crap, but then I will hand that over to our project manager, and then she will put it into a Gantt chart properly. But for me, yeah, visually, it's just I can just like draw out little lines and just get an idea in my head. It's really useful, I find.
Yeah.
The thing is, I can also work out from that is actually which task needs to be done now, so that we can move on to the next task for next week.
Yeah.
If the models aren't ready, then the level designer cannot put the level together next week if we haven't got our stuff done. So I can even say that actually this week we're not moving fast enough. So I could say to the level designer, because you've got a bit of free time, can you just help out with the models a little bit? And he'll be like, yeah, that's fine. And he'll help out, which means next week all his assets are ready.
Right. Perfect. So, and again, like the Kanban isn't necessarily going to tell you that. Let's say we put everything onto a Kanban for all of us, right? And we're all going to be in one big team. And someone starts doing tasks, but remember, one of the things about the project is getting the right task done in the right time and in the right order. What if I start doing really low priority tasks because they're the easy ones, but then something on the critical path risks falling behind? Do you see? Right? So I encourage you to try and combine those 2 things. The other thing that I'd encourage you to think about is Agile projects, which are aimed generally at software projects, move in sprints. So what that means is you do a small project cycle of discovery, that's thinking about the problem, design, development, and then testing. Discover, design, develop, test. Discover, design, develop, test. And you keep doing this in bursts. Because you're working with software, what you want to do is make sure you're doing your testing as you go along. What you don't want to do is, or what will increase your risk is if you do a lot of work and then test it all at the end, and then maybe it doesn't work, or something doesn't quite work the way you want it to. Now the problem is you don't know exactly where the problem happened. Maybe it was a problem with something in the first sprint, right? But if we're testing regularly, and if we're testing at the end of every phase, and we keep playing with the thing that we're developing all the time, then we can know exactly where the sticking points are and where the problems have come up. And again, it comes down to the same idea of working in an agile way, keeping a finger on the pulse, keeping an eye on where the project is, testing things as frequently as possible, right? So you're creating these VR applications. Whatever the latest thing has been that is being developed, test it. Divide it into sprints. Sprint 1 is going to be this. The background could be one sprint. The background animations could be another sprint. Some of the interface stuff, that could be another sprint, right? But the more of these that we do, the more likely it is that we're going to get what we want as an outcome, rather than right at the end, saying, right, now let's make sure this thing works, and then it doesn't. And I'm sure in things like game design, I know they do this all the time. The game design, app design, this is what they do. They're having short bursts of action, followed by, now let's make sure it's working, or debug it as you go along. Much easier to figure out where the problem is. Yeah? Good. So team, here are 3 daily questions that you would have in what they call kind of Scrum meetings. And what these are, they're stand-up meetings. They happen very quickly, but you do them at the beginning of every day. And if the project team is just you, then you answer these 3 questions for yourself. They're as follows. Number 1, what have you done so far? So what did you get done yesterday? Number 2, what's your plan for today? What are you doing next, now that that bit's been done? And number 3 is, what are the challenges? Are there any problems that you can foresee with what's ahead? Now, imagine if we're standing around in a team and we're having this. Even with a team of 10 people, you can be done in almost like a minute a person, right? Yesterday I did this and this and this. Today I'm working on that. Okay, are there any challenges? No, I think I've got everything I need. Or somebody will say, well, yesterday I was doing this. Today I'm trying to do this, but I'm having a problem with this. Great. Let's see if we can solve that problem right now. But it's happening daily. It's happening at the beginning of every day, right? We're figuring out the needs, because as project manager, the well-being and the functioning of your team becomes your responsibility. Even when it's your own project, well, then you're the whole thing, right? There's no one to defer to. So we need to make sure that every day we're having this little planning session with ourselves, if not with others. From what I understand through Taryn, is you do have access to certain resources, certain individuals that are going to help you with coding or what have you. They may not view you as a project manager, so you may not be able to say to them, I want a Scrum meeting with you every morning and I'm going to ask you these 3 questions. But you might be able to ask them if they wouldn't mind having a little 5-minute chat every morning or every afternoon when they're working on things with you. You might have to position yourself carefully so that they don't feel kind of imposed upon. But it's definitely worth keeping a finger on the pulse.
Just as an example, so we in Taron 3D on a production side, we do a lot of Unity projects, and we have our stand-ups, and this is actually Daljeet's implementation in our looking at our business and giving us this advice and what we've implemented, because we were having this problem that tasks weren't getting done and projects were slipping and sliding. And so he advised us to have like a Scrum stand-up meeting on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And what that meant was that if one of our designers was having a problem on the Wednesday, he could say, well, I haven't got this information. And then the project manager could go to the client and say, oh, you haven't given us these, models. Because if that would have slipped on the Wednesday, then that would have meant he would have lost another 2 days waiting for that information. So you'll see how, this constant sort of like checking at having like this sort of system procedure of checking regularly, it kind of makes you check, where am I? And it puts you like, I remember speaking to Caramel this morning about that sort of panic and worry.
Yeah.
And then that's like kind of like a good thing in a way, because that panic or worry should make you look at your document and say, okay, what have I done? Where am I? And once you see that actually I'm actually ahead of schedule, you can actually feel good about yourself and kind of feel cool and calm and chilled, and have a bit of time off maybe.
Yeah. So team, the things that we've looked at are little techniques, little tools that I think, given that you have 4 weeks, your projects have already started, I tried to pull together tools which I think you could combine with your project document that were going to give you the most possible output, right? And I think it will be those visual things. It will be things like the Kanban, it will be things like the Gantt chart, and it will be things like having that daily check-in. I think those things will increase the odds, reduce the panic, like Taryn was just saying. What am I going to do? How am I going to cope? This is so much work. It turns it into a thing that you can then divide and conquer, right? Because you've split the big project into its constituent parts, those individual tasks. And once you know what they are, what it takes to get them done, how much time you have, then it's a matter of getting one task done after the next, until that sequence completes your project. Yeah. So this is where I would throw it to you and ask, what do you think this means in terms of mindset? How might we approach a project? What do we need to do each day? How do we need to think about how we may need to work with others? What should we do if we face setbacks? And how are we going to look after our own health and well-being in the process? Thoughts from yourselves, please. I'm going to ask Milka first because I can see her and she's been taking lots of notes.
I really have been taking loads and loads of notes because apart from being on, on the admin team with the XR Bootcamp, I also manage the Black Coder Bootcamp, where we teach Black women how to code and become software developers. And honestly speaking, this session has just brought so much clarity thus far. And just in terms of mindset, I was just taking down these questions, as much as they are so simple, but I think they just break down things so much. And it just makes life a lot easier. And I think if you have, these questions written down somewhere, it's easier to develop that mindset than having to think through how to develop that mindset. Does that make sense? So at least I have this question and I can read, okay, how might we approach a project, for example, or how might we approach it each day? Now I know which mindset is needed for that approach, rather than sitting there thinking, okay, what is the mindset we need for today to make sure that we tackle the tasks that are required? So I think essentially, as far even, task boarding or, the to-do, doing and done, having these questions alongside that, or even the gut, I think, chart, it was having these questions alongside that also ensures that every bit of task is able to have its own mindset, because you're able to answer these questions for every single bit of task. So yeah, I cannot tell you how much the session was for me more than it was for the ladies.
I'm glad it was useful. And so my experience as a coach is when you're coaching somebody, you're not telling them what to do, because that's consultancy, right? As a coach, you're asking questions. You're trying to ask questions that are going to move people into new dimensions of thinking where their thought process hasn't gone yet, right? And you're just inviting that with questions. So like Milka was just saying, think of these questions as an invitation, right? Because most of the time we're just on autopilot. We're just trying to get things done. We're panicked. We're worried about time, stress, pressure, childcare, the pandemic, working from home, fire alarms going off when you're in the middle of a presentation, right? All of these things. But it's like, look, how might we approach setbacks when they arrive? Because they're going to happen. To ask the question, how might we maintain ourselves? A good question to ask when you find yourself feeling stressed is, what do I need? Right? Just like a friend would ask you. So if we were working together and we're colleagues and I look at you and you look stressed, I'd probably say, okay, look, what do you need right now? Do you need to stretch your legs? Do you need a cup of tea? Do you need to pass this to someone else? Like, what is it? What's going to get you back in the zone again? So ask the questions. When you ask the right questions, the right answers, sometimes they come very, very easily. Right? So team, this is where I'm going to throw it open to yourselves. I'm here now to answer any questions that you might have. They can be directly related to with project management. They can be to do with mindset. They can be to do with other things. If you think I might be a useful resource, and I think that will kind of conclude this. So someone has their hand up. Please go ahead. Please just unmute yourself. Don't wait for me. Just unmute yourself and chime right in.
Hi. So one question I have is about working with live documents.
Mhm.
So I use them and I find them really, really helpful. But okay, so when you're updating the document and when you're kind of checking back with it,
Mhm.
do you go back and kind of cross out what you haven't done? So you have your original plan, and it never goes to that original plan and things get shifted. Do you just delete and write them somewhere else, or do you cross them off but still keep them there? I don't know if that makes sense, and I know it might sound a little bit kind of like, does it matter?
No, I hear exactly what you're saying. I would consider, it's up to you how you do it. It's up to you how you work. I would consider saving versions of that document, right? Version 1.0, version 1.1, version 1.2, and so on. Because then what you do have is at the end, when you go back and review, you can look and say, look, this is what I started with and this is what I ended up with. And you can put the two side by side and compare them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that definitely does. Thank you.
Because then you get to actually learn from the experience. And that's something else that a project manager is supposed to do. They're supposed to look back and review everything at the end and say, what did I learn from this? And how am I going to, what's going to be different next time? Yeah. And those new versions of those documents, if you're working on a bigger project and other stakeholders, they may need to sign off on those as the updates happen, right?
Yeah.
So they've signed off on version 1, but now they have to sign off on version 1.1 and then version 1.2 because, you know, it's a live document.
Yeah, that definitely makes more sense, especially when working with someone else to kind of have that version control and then be able to get it signed off and they can see the changes type of thing. So yeah, thank you.
Yep. Good stuff. Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a question. Just in terms of, so when you're project managing and other people need to be involved.
Sorry, you've muted yourself.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, so when you're project managing, and so that essentially is your role, and there are other people that have to fulfill other tasks within that project, but your personality is the type to sort of bury yourself or enter into this planning, and you being that, when is the right time to essentially introduce other stakeholders so that you don't become frustrated, I guess, because sometimes, not that you don't appreciate feedback from other people, but there's a time when that needs to happen. So you need to ensure that you're confident in what you have created as a plan first before you can introduce. So yeah, if you could share a little bit on that.
So that's a symbiotic process, right? So let's say, for example, Milka, if I was going to do a manager project for you, I would want a meeting with you. I would have lots of questions for you, and I would take a lot of the content that comes out of those conversations with you as a key stakeholder, and then maybe I'd have conversations with the other key stakeholders, and that would inform the plan. Does that make sense? So I wouldn't like just go off and make the plan by myself and say, hey, I think we should do this. I want to understand, what is the purpose of this project? What are we trying to achieve? What are the outcomes that we're going to look for? How is there going to be evidence that we've produced this thing and it's doing what it's supposed to do? What's that going to look like in the near future, right? And because I've got all that information with you, then I'm not just stuck in my own head, because I might go and create a plan that is just doesn't jive with your vision at all, right? It just might not, like, you might look at it and say, this is not what I want. I wanted this. I want the emphasis on these things. So what you do is you have those meetings, you create your plan, and then you go back and you discuss that plan and then get it signed off. And what that means is we've started off on the right foot. Everything is happening as it should be happening. Yeah?
No, yeah, that's awesome. Thanks.
Perfect. Anyone else?
Yeah, I've got one question. What is the single most important quality you think a project manager should have?
Communication skills. Well, two things. Your planning skills are essential for you to do your job, right? Your communication skills are essential to get the job done. Does that make sense?
Yep, definitely.
Right? Because you could be absolutely phenomenal at creating a plan and doing paperwork and creating charts and all that kind of thing. If you can't then communicate to the team, this is what we're trying to do, this is what I want you to do, this is how it has to be done, then it's going to be very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Right. So there's planning and there are people skills. I would say those two. If I had to pick two, it'd be those two. And if I had to pick one, I couldn't, because I don't think you could just have one of those and then assume that it's going to be enough to get the job done. And Taryn, I know you've seen this in your own organization as well. You know, you've spoken to me about certain team members of yours that need a lot more input and a lot more direction.
Yeah.
And what Taryn has been doing is in his meetings now and his one-to-ones, he adapts his communication style to the needs of the individual, right? Because as project owner and project manager, it becomes his job to make sure that everyone's getting what it is that they need in order to get the job done in terms of communication.
I have a question.
Please.
And it's more of a like your opinion, I guess. Yep. Do you recommend to be like product owner and project manager, or is it best to keep it separate?
Generally, those things are kept separate. Look, if you're doing a role in an organization, you know, you're part of a bigger organization, then product manager and, pardon me, product owner and project manager, those two things you would want to keep separate, if at all possible. And this is why a lot of people will bring in an external project manager who doesn't work in the organization, because there's that professional detachment, right? Mm-hmm. But then in the work that you're doing at the moment, you are so many of those things at the same time. Yeah. You're having to project manage yourself, you are the product owner, and so on and so on. But do you know what? I think one day, hopefully, and my hopes and best wishes and prayers are with all of you, that you will all come to a point through organizations like XR Bootcamp and working with Taryn and all the rest, that you'll get to a point where you'll actually employ people and bring them in for exactly that reason, right? And you'll say, do you know what? I want to separate myself from this. I want to own the product, and I want somebody else to do the management. But for now, we have to do what we have to do. Cleona, please.
Sorry, I was just clapping to what you were saying.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to do. Like, I'm completely on that wavelength. It would be fantastic to just see everyone doing their own thing after this and hiring and kind of feeding back into the community. So I was just clapping. I was bigging it up.
Like, there's no reason why you shouldn't. And again, it comes down to mindset, right? We've been through incredibly tough times, all of us. Nobody's immune to what's just happened. Yeah, no one's come off unscathed. I think just about everyone here, I would guess, has probably lost someone 1 or 2 degrees away for any number of reasons, whether that's mental health, whether that's, you know, COVID or any other reason. But the idea of being involved in something like this is, I heard a line from somebody, which is, anyone seen that movie, A Bronx Tale? Has anyone seen A Bronx Tale?
Yes, I love that film.
I love that movie as well. So, you know, the guy that plays Sonny in A Bronx Tale, Chaz Palminteri, he was actually the little kid in The Bronx Tale that That's who he actually was, but he played Sonny. He played like the mobster. I heard an interview with him and he said something which I thought was absolutely beautiful. He goes, look, life is for everybody. And it just like, when I heard that, I was like, that's one of the most beautiful ways I've heard something like that put. Life is for everybody. So, you know, we're here not to just do for ourselves, but we're here to do for others as well, and feed into the community, and, you know, be the people that we wish we had around us, that could have helped us and given us the right breaks and all that kind of thing. So yeah, definitely succeed in these projects. I know you will. Take the learnings forward, learn from the things that will inevitably go wrong, and feed that back into growth and improvement and encouragement, right? And absolutely, I look forward to the day when I hear back from one of yourselves, hopefully one day through Melka, through Taryn, or whoever, saying, do you know what? I'm hiring a project manager now, because now I've got a bigger team. We're doing bigger things. You know, that thing I was working on, I prototyped it in XR Bootcamp. That set me off on this whole trajectory and journey. And now I've got a team working for me, and I'm, you know, I'm hiring people, and I'm growing, and I'm making sure that other people benefit and come along on that journey.
I have another question.
Sure.
So obviously a project will have a beginning and an end, and you know, I'm guessing there's a necessary pace and momentum that is needed for that duration of the project. So how do you ensure that, you know, especially for the ladies who are doing personal projects, and it's not necessarily a team, or there's a team that they're doing it with, how do you ensure that you keep that pace and momentum necessary for that specific project, so that your momentum doesn't go down at a certain point or higher? So how do you ensure that throughout from the beginning to the end, you have the right momentum and pace, so that you can ensure you produce the right results, basically?
Yeah. So I would say the purpose of the project is a big part of that. Like, how much do you care about the thing you're doing? Because we all know that when we care about something, we work harder, we go further, we make bigger sacrifices, and we get the thing done, right? So one of the key things is caring about the thing that you're doing, caring about the outcome, and then that being in context of a bigger story for you. Because you're going to have ups and downs. That's inevitable. Some days you're going to wake up, you're going to be tired, you know, you've got other stresses and all this. There's going to be ebbs and flows. The things that will definitely help is, one, having a plan, because you know where you're supposed to be. You know when you're behind, you know what you need to do. And if you're looking at that regularly, then the odds of you falling really far behind reduce, right? The other thing is it being attached to something that's an emotional driver for you. Because in my master's that I did in cognitive neuroscience and neuropsychology, I was really interested in decision making. And one of the things that I learned is all decision making has an emotional content, an emotional context and angle to it. There's no decision that we make where there's like zero emotion involved. Yeah, we weigh things up, we figure it out, and at a neurological level, it's not just, oh, here's the decision making bit. It's like, no, all of the brain is working, all these different areas. There's the higher reasoning, and there's your emotional systems, and they're all on the go. So we need to care, because problems are going to come. We need to care enough so that it's worth driving forward even when it's difficult. And to be honest, this is why people do great at work sometimes and other people don't. Generally, the people that love what they're doing and care about the outcomes, they tend to do better. You know, they tend to be the ones that are up for promotions and moving forward and all that kind of thing. You know, but the beauty is there's people that care about things, but they don't have access to certain skills and certain tools and that sort of thing. So with the work that you're doing at XR Bootcamp, there's a beautiful opportunity of taking what drives people, which is very obvious when people talked about their projects, and combining that with the actual skills. And now, you know, you're combining hustle and muscle, right? Those two things are working together now, and the odds of success go up. The other thing is small wins, right? Because every time we have a small win, that's a little bit of encouragement. So if we can plan to have small wins as we go along, even if it's, oh, I got that thing done, or, you know, I've made sure that I've kept up with this routine and I've made sure that my project is on course. Having these little victories, that keeps us encouraged. What happens is if we don't have lots of little victories, and it's another reason to have daily tasks and daily targets. If we don't have those little victories, we don't get that constant feedback that says to us, good job, you're doing well, good job, you're doing well, good job, you're doing well. And having that constant feedback just tends to keep your spirits up, right? Because there's little pats on the back happening all the time. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, honestly, that does. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I
Is
am
there anyone else,
mindful of the time. Yeah.
or should we wrap?
I would like to say then, if we were wrapping, just thank you ever so much for your presentation one. And I overstand, and I've got Taryn, if you're listening, I'm going to definitely simplify the, it's made a lot of things clearer in regards to the specific bit that I'd like to present and make that the project, rather than I have a project and where do what bits do I need to approach. So yeah, it's made it a lot clearer, and understanding also who my stakeholders are within that, because obviously that's ultimately what's going to drive it, and
Yeah,
who's going to want to be interested in it, if that makes sense.
perfect.
So yeah, I just want to say thank you ever so much.
Thanks for your participation.
No, yeah, thank you so much, Daljit. I think I'm gonna stop the recording
All right.
there.